The vulture circled overhead, casting fleeting shadows across the parched Wyoming prairie. Grey Elk crouched behind a clump of sagebrush, studying the abandoned homestead below. 3 days without food had left him hollow-eyed, but something about this place demanded investigation. The scavenger bird kept returning to the same spot, yet no visible carrion lay scattered on the hard-packed earth. As Grey Elk approached the weathered sod house, a faint sound stopped him cold, a whimper, barely audible, rising from beneath the ground. Following the sound, he discovered a crude metal pipe jutting awkwardly from the earth, poorly concealed by loose stones. His warrior's instinct screamed danger as he pried away the stones, revealing a sealed wooden door secured with heavy chains. The sound came again, clearer now, human, desperate, young. Grey Elk worked his knife against the lock until it gave way with a rusty snap. When he lifted the door, the stench hit him like a physical blow, human waste, sickness, despair. In the underground chamber below, barely larger than a grave, lay a child. Her skeletal frame was covered in filth-matted hair obscuring her face. But when she turned toward the sudden light, her blue eyes reflected such terror and disbelief that Grey Elk's breath caught in his throat. The girl, she could not be more than 10, recoiled from the brightness, pressing herself against the damp stone wall. Tears cut clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks as she sobbed silently, her thin body shaking with fear. She raised her bony arms to shield herself, expecting another blow, another cruelty. Grey Elk's own exile flooded back the day his chief had banished him for refusing to slaughter settler women and children, and the months of wandering alone, the crushing weight of belonging nowhere. But this child's suffering made his own seem trivial by comparison. Here was innocence, imprisoned, hope buried alive. The sight awakened something deep within him, a purpose he hadn't felt since leaving his people. "No harm," he whispered in English, extending his hand slowly. His voice cracked from disuse, but he forced the words out with all the gentleness he could muster. "No hurt you." She made no sound except for those heartbreaking, silent sobs that spoke of a spirit nearly broken, but not quite extinguished. Her eyes, though terrified, still held a flicker of life, a ember that cruel hands had tried to snuff out, but failed to destroy completely. Grey Elk knelt at the chamber's edge, making himself smaller, less threatening. He had seen trapped animals react with similar terror, and this child had been caged longer than any creature should endure. "Water," he said softly, offering his precious water skin. "Drink." The girl's parched lips parted slightly, but still she cowered. Years of survival had taught Grey Elk patience, so he waited, letting her make the first move toward trust. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was only minutes, she reached out with a skeletal hand and touched the water skin. As she drank, Grey Elk studied her features beneath the grime. Fair skin beneath the dirt, light hair matted with filth, blue eyes that spoke of European heritage. A settler's child then, but what settler would imprison their own daughter like a rabid dog? "Name," he asked gently. Her mouth moved, but no sound emerged. She tried again, touching her throat with confusion, as if her voice had abandoned her entirely. Instead, she traced letters in the dirt, with a trembling finger, A-N-N-A. "Anna," Grey Elk repeated, and she nodded eagerly, tears flowing again. But these seemed different, touched with something that might have been relief. "I am Grey Elk. Will help." In that moment, as he watched this broken child attempt to communicate her very identity through scratches in the dirt, Grey Elk knew with absolute certainty that whatever had brought him to this place, whatever consequences followed, he could never leave this child to suffer another day in this underground prison. The decision that would change both their lives forever was made in the space of a heartbeat, witnessed only by the wheeling vulture overhead and the vast, indifferent sky. Anna-Louise Carter had been 7 when the mine explosion took her father, Thomas. The memory of that spring morning in 1865 remained vivid despite 3 years of trying to forget Sheriff Holt arriving at dawn with his hat in his hands, the words tumbling out like rocks down a shaft, 12 men dead, including Thomas Carter, trapped beneath tons of collapsed timber and stone. Ruth Carter had barely waited for the funeral to end before reshaping the household to her liking. "Your father's gone, child." She'd said that very evening, her voice carrying no trace of grief, only cold calculation. Time you learned how things really work in this world. The change had been swift and brutal. The woman who had played the loving stepmother while Thomas lived revealed her true nature with shocking speed. Gone were the gentle words, the patient explanations, and the bedtime stories. In their place came harsh commands, cruel punishments for imagined infractions, and a coldness that seemed to radiate from Ruth's very bones. Anna had tried to please her desperately, seeking some remnant of the woman who had once braided her hair and sung lullabies. But Ruth's transformation was complete and irreversible. Every smile had been a lie, every kindness a performance for Thomas's benefit. With her husband dead, Ruth no longer needed to pretend. Oh, the homestead sat on valuable land with water rights that remained precious, even in drought years. More importantly, though, Anna couldn't have known it then, Thomas had discovered silver deposits on the property information he'd kept secret from the mining company that employed him. His plan had been to file his own claim to secure his daughter's future with the wealth that lay beneath their feet. But Anna, as his only heir, stood between Ruth and complete control of that inheritance. At 7 years old, she was too young to understand property law, too trusting to recognize the deadly game being played around her. She knew only that the woman she'd been taught to call mother had become a stranger who looked at her with calculating eyes. The solution Ruth devised was both simple and monstrous. The root cellar beneath the kitchen, originally built for food storage during winter months, would serve a new purpose. With a few modifications, stronger locks, a crude ventilation system, just enough space for a small body, it would become the perfect prison. Ruth spread the story throughout the territory with careful precision. The child had caught fever, suffered terribly, and died within days. She even conducted a mock funeral, complete with a small coffin weighted with stones and mourning clothes that drew sympathy from neighbors. The performance was flawless, the grief convincing. Few questioned the tale. Childhood deaths were tragically common on the frontier. For 3 years, Anna existed in perpetual twilight. The cellar's stone walls wept moisture in winter and radiated heat in summer. She had a bucket for her needs emptied twice weekly, a straw mattress that grew thin and moldy over time, and the terrible, crushing silence that surrounded her like water, broken only by Ruth's occasional visits to deliver just enough food to sustain life. But it was the isolation that nearly broke her spirit entirely. Through the ventilation pipe, she could sometimes hear voices above, travelers seeking directions, workers hired for seasonal labor, the occasional social visit from neighbors. Normal life continued mere feet above her head, while she rotted in darkness, forgotten by everyone who might have loved her. Ruth reinforced this daily torture with carefully chosen words, describing how the townspeople had moved on, how no one ever mentioned the dead Carter girl anymore, how the world had closed over her absence like water over a dropped stone. "You don't exist, child," Ruth would whisper during her visits. "You never existed. You're just a ghost haunting an empty grave." Above ground, Ruth flourished. She hired seasonal help to work the land, manage the property with ruthless efficiency, and gradually expanded her influence in the small community. Her transformation from grieving widow to respected landowner seemed natural to most observers. She had Thomas's property, his mining rights, his reputation, everything, except the heir who stood between her and absolute ownership. But Anna had not died, despite Ruth's best efforts to convince her otherwise. Hidden in the deepest part of her mind, she clung to memories of her father, his gentle hands, teaching her to read his voice, explaining the stars, his promise that she would always be his precious girl. These memories became her anchor, preventing complete surrender to the darkness Ruth tried to impose. She learned to mark time by the rhythm of footsteps above, to gauge seasons by the temperature of the stone walls, to survive on hope so thin it was barely visible. And always she dreamed of escape, not the dramatic rescue of fairy tales, but the simple possibility that someone somewhere might remember that Anna-Louise Carter had once existed and deserved to exist again. Grey Elk's path to that homestead had been carved by his own moral choice. When Chief Black Kettle ordered retaliation against a settler wagon train, Grey Elk had looked at the huddled families, women clutching infants, children no older than Anna, and refused his orders. "This is not war," he told his chief, standing alone against the War Council's fury. "This is murder of innocence. If we become what they say we are, we lose more than our land. We lose our souls." The words had sealed his fate. Exile had followed, swiftly pronounced before the entire tribe, as a warning to others who might question tribal authority. Cast out with only his weapons horse and the clothes on his back, Grey Elk had spent 3 years wandering the territory's margins, belonging neither to his birth people nor to the white settlements that viewed him with suspicion and fear. Those years had been a crucible, teaching him to survive on cunning rather than strength, to read the subtle signs of weather and terrain that meant the difference between life and death. He had learned to live with loneliness so profound, it felt like a physical weight to find meaning in small acts of survival, rather than the grand purposes that had once defined his existence. The drought of 1868 had driven him eastward, following game trails and water sources that grew scarce with each passing day. When he spotted the circling vulture, his hunter's instincts told him to investigate. Carrion meant death, but death often meant meat for those desperate enough to take it. He could never have imagined that following that dark bird would lead him to discover a horror that would define the rest of his life and offer him a chance at redemption he had never dared hope for. As Grey Elk lifted Anna from her underground tomb, bringing her into Wyoming's sunlight, for the first time in 3 years, the child pressed her face against his chest, overwhelmed by sensations she had almost forgotten existed. The warmth of another human being, the rough texture of buckskin, the steady rhythm of a heartbeat that was not her own. These simple things seemed miraculous after her years of isolation. But their moment of salvation was shattered by a voice that cut through the air like a blade. "You thieving savage." Ruth Carter stood 30 yards away, a shotgun trained on them both. Her face was twisted with rage and panic, the expression of someone whose carefully constructed lies were crumbling before her eyes. She had returned from town to find her darkest secret exposed, her prisoner freed by the very type of person she had taught Anna to fear. Grey Elk carefully set Anna on the ground, where she immediately curled into a protective ball, her brief taste of freedom already threatened. He straightened slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening, reading the desperation in Ruth's eyes, like tracks in mud. "Child needs help," he said, simply gesturing toward Anna's pitiful condition. The evidence was undeniable. No healthy child would look like this walking corpse. No loving parent would keep a daughter in such squalor. "That's not your concern." Ruth spat, advancing with the shotgun held steady. "You're trespassing on my land, stealing my property. And that girl died 3 years ago. Everyone knows it." Grey Elk studied Ruth's face, reading the calculation behind her fury. This woman had imprisoned the child, deliberately planned every detail of her suffering with cold precision. The girl's condition, the hidden chamber, the elaborate deception, it all clicked into place with horrible clarity. "Property?" Grey Elk asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of genuine confusion. "Child is not property. Child is person." Ruth's laugh was harsh, brittle as breaking glass. "Everything on this land belongs to me, including her. She's legally dead, which means no one will miss her when I bury you both." Should have kept riding, Indian. The shotgun's twin barrels stared at Grey Elk like dead eyes, but he felt oddly calm. He had faced death before, in battle and in exile, but never for a cause so clear. This broken child deserved a chance at life, at healing, at discovering what lay beyond the prison walls that had defined her existence. "No," he said simply. "Girl comes with me." Ruth's face contorted with fresh rage, all pretense of civilization stripped away. "Then you both die here, and I'll tell Sheriff Holt I killed a savage who was molesting a dead child's grave. Won't even need to explain the blood." The first shot sent Grey Elk diving behind the stone foundation of an old well pellet singing past his ear. Anna remained where he'd left her, too weak or terrified to move her eyes wide with a fear that had become her constant companion. Ruth broke open the shotgun, reloading with practiced efficiency. She had clearly prepared for this possibility, kept shells within easy reach for the day someone discovered her secret. "I've worked too hard to let some half-breed savage ruin everything," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard with deadly calm. "This land is mine by right, earned by nursing a dying man and tolerating his sniveling brat. I won't give it up to satisfy your misguided conscience." Grey Elk assessed his options rapidly. The nearest substantial cover was a collapsed barn, but reaching it meant crossing 20 yards of open ground. Ruth had the advantage of position and superior firepower. His bow was slung across his back, but arrows would be useless against the shotgun's devastating close-range power. "Sheriff comes soon," he called out, testing her reaction. "Sheriff believes what I tell him," Ruth replied coldly. "Just like everyone else in this county. Poor widow attacked by a savage while visiting her daughter's grave. He'll probably give me a medal for killing you." She was right, Grey Elk realized. His word against hers would carry little weight in territorial courts, especially with Anna too traumatized to speak coherently. But the child's condition would testify to years of abuse if they could survive long enough to present that evidence. As Ruth advanced, Grey Elk's mind worked frantically. 3 years of exile had taught him to think like prey, as well as predator, to find advantages where none seemed to exist. The woman was confident in her superior weapons, but confidence could breed carelessness. And Grey Elk had survived this long by being cleverer than those who hunted him. On last chance to run Indian. Ruth called out now, close enough that her next shot would be impossible to dodge. "Take it, and maybe I'll let you live." Grey Elk looked at Anna, still curled on the ground like a wounded animal, and made his choice. Some battles couldn't be won by running. Some innocents were worth dying to protect. His exile had taught him many things, but perhaps the most important was this: a man's worth was not measured by what he conquered, but by what he was willing to sacrifice. "No," he said, rising from cover with his hands visible but ready. "Girl comes with me." Ruth's face twisted with rage. "Then you both die here." But as she raised the shotgun for the killing shot, Grey Elk was already moving not away from danger, but directly toward it. Using the last thing Ruth would expect, a direct assault when she held every advantage. Sometimes he had learned the most desperate gamble was also the wisest strategy. The game had changed. This was no longer about survival, it was about salvation. Night settled over the homestead like a shroud. Grey Elk had established a hidden camp in the rolling hills above the property, close enough to observe, but far enough to remain concealed. From this vantage point, he could see the lamp burning in Ruth's window, casting long shadows across the yard where their confrontation had played out hours earlier. His shoulder ached where shotgun pellets had grazed him during his desperate charge. Ruth's surprise had given him precious seconds to reach cover, but she had recovered quickly, forcing him to withdraw or face certain death. Now she waited in her fortress of lies, while Anna remained trapped in the darkness below. Grey Elk inventoried his meager supply, strips of dried meat, medicinal herbs gathered during his wanderings, water, enough for 2 days. Not much for mounting a rescue against an armed and prepared enemy. But he had survived 3 years of exile with less, and desperation often bred innovation. He waited until well past midnight before moving, when even the most vigilant guard would feel fatigue's pull. The moon provided just enough light to navigate without betraying his position, and years of hunting had taught him to move like a ghost across any terrain. As he approached the house, every sense strained for signs of alarm. Ruth had proven herself intelligent and ruthless. She would not leave her secret unguarded now that it had been exposed, but the building remained silent, no movement visible through the windows. The chamber entrance had been hastily resealed with stones, but Grey Elk had noted the ventilation pipe during his earlier reconnaissance. Kneeling beside it, he tapped gently on the metal 3 short, 2 long a pattern that might distinguish his presence from random sound. A faint shuffling answered from below. Anna was alive at least, though Grey Elk could only imagine her terror at hearing movement above after her brief taste of freedom. "Anna," he whispered into the pipe, his voice barely audible. "Can hear." No verbal response, but the movement below became more purposeful. Grey Elk pushed strips of jerky down the pipe, followed by a small bundle of healing herbs. Whether she would understand their purpose remained uncertain, but he had to try. A sudden creak from the house froze him in place. Through the thin walls, he could hear Ruth moving about her footsteps, restless and agitated. She was awake, pacing, probably planning her next move. She knew he hadn't fled. A man didn't risk his life to save a child, only to abandon her at the first setback. Grey Elk melted back into the shadows, but not before whispering once more into the pipe, "Help comes, not leave you." Dawn brought unwelcome news. Dust clouds on the distant road announced approaching riders, at least 4 men, moving with the purpose of those who had been paid to find someone. Ruth had summoned reinforcements, probably sent word to town about the savage who attacked her while mourning. From his hidden position, Grey Elk watched her greet the arrivals. Even at this distance, her animated gesturing and their subsequent deployment around the property told the story clearly. She was directing a manhunt, using his attack on her as justification for bringing armed men onto her land. By midday, Grey Elk had identified the search party's leader, a grizzled man with a pronounced limp, who directed the others with obvious military experience. 2 of his companions looked like typical frontier drifters, hard men who asked few questions as long as the pay was good. But the 4th member of the group troubled Grey Elk more, a young man sandy-haired and nervous, who kept glancing toward the hills with something that looked more like doubt than determination. This changed everything. One woman with a shotgun was manageable given patience and the right opportunity. 4 armed men actively searching for him made rescue nearly impossible. But Grey Elk had faced worse odds during his warrior days, before exile had taught him that survival sometimes mattered more than honor. The key was patience, observation, and choosing the right moment to strike. These men were being paid to hunt, not to die for Ruth Carter's secrets. When the moment came, their commitment would be tested against their desire to live. As evening approached, 2 of the searchers departed for town, probably to resupply or report their lack of progress. The limping man and the nervous young one remained, establishing a guard rotation around the house. Grey Elk watched their patterns, noted their habits, searched for weaknesses he could exploit. The opportunity came near midnight during the young man's watch. Propped against a fence post with his rifle across his knees, he struggled against fatigue, his head nodding despite his best efforts to stay alert. His nervousness earlier suggested he was less comfortable with this assignment than his companions. Grey Elk moved like smoke, using the shadows cast by the barn and outbuildings to approach unseen. A deliberately dropped stone drew the guard's attention away from the house, his rifle swinging toward the sound with startled alertness. While the young man investigated, Grey Elk sprinted for the chamber entrance, praying the stones hadn't been mortared in place. They shifted under his hands, grinding against each other with sounds that seemed thunderous in the night silence. The rifle shot shattered the stillness before Grey Elk had fully cleared the entrance. Wood splintered from the doorframe as he heaved the heavy portal open and called down into the darkness. "Anna, come now." She appeared at the bottom of the crude steps like a ghost materializing from shadow, her face pale in the starlight, but her movements showing more strength than he had dared hope. The food and herbs had helped, or perhaps desperation had given her energy that 3 years of captivity had not quite destroyed. Grey Elk reached down, grasping her thin arms and pulling her up as boots pounded across the yard behind them. Ruth's voice cracked through the night air like a whip. "Thief murderer." Grey Elk swept Anna into his arms and ran zigzagging as the shotgun roared behind them. Pellets stung his legs and back, but his momentum carried them toward the safety of a nearby ravine that he had scouted during his daylight reconnaissance. They tumbled down the embankment together, Grey Elk twisting to take the impact and protect Anna's fragile body. Above, voices shouted and boots thundered as their pursuers rushed past, following the wrong trail in their haste to prevent an escape. For precious moments they lay silent in the ravine's concealment, breathing hard in the darkness. Anna's body was rigid against his chest, her heart beating like a frightened bird's wings, but she made no sound. Even in extremity, the learned silence of her imprisonment held. "Safe now," Grey Elk whispered, though he knew it was only temporary. Dawn would bring organized pursuit, and their hiding place would not survive daylight scrutiny. Anna's hand found his arm fingers gripping with surprising strength. In that touch he felt not just fear, but determination, a spark of will that 3 years of captivity had not quite extinguished. The child who had survived Ruth's cruelest efforts possessed a core of steel that might yet see them both to safety. Whatever came next, they would face it together. For 5 days, Grey Elk and Anna moved across the drought-stricken landscape, traveling mainly at night, sheltering in whatever cover they could find during the dangerous daylight hours. Anna's condition proved both better and worse than Grey Elk had initially realized. Years without proper sunlight had left her eyes painfully sensitive, forcing her to travel with her face covered. Her feet, never allowed to develop properly in the cramped chamber, made walking an agony that she bore in stoic silence. But her spirit, Grey Elk discovered, was far from broken. She never complained, never asked to rest beyond what he deemed safe. More importantly, she was learning to trust not just Grey Elk's protection, but her own ability to survive in the world above ground. Each day brought small signs of recovery, words whispered instead of mouthed, faster movement across rough terrain. Moments when fear didn't dominate her expression entirely. On the 6th morning, Grey Elk made a dangerous decision. They needed supplies, proper food, medicine for Anna's various ailments, information about the search that surely continued behind them. The nearest source was Bitter Creek, a small frontier town that served the scattered homesteads of the region. He settled Anna in a concealed position overlooking the town, providing her with water and what remained of their dried meat. "Stay hidden," he instructed, studying her face to ensure she understood. "Return before sun high." Her nod was barely perceptible, but her blue eyes held understanding. She would wait as she had learned to wait through 3 years of captivity. But this waiting held promise rather than despair. Bitter Creek consisted of one dusty street, lined with false-fronted buildings that pretended to be more substantial than they were. Grey Elk approached cautiously, aware that his presence would draw attention from people unused to seeing Indians, except as threats or curiosities. His concerns proved justified when a burly man with an elaborate mustache blocked his path outside the general store. "Don't see many of your kind around here, Redskin," the man said, hand resting on his pistol. "Got business in town or just passing through?" Before the confrontation could escalate, a calm voice intervened. "Let him pass, Jenkins." Sheriff Daniel Holt approached with measured steps, his badge catching the morning sunlight. Unlike many frontier lawmen who earned their positions through violence and intimidation, Holt had built his reputation on fairness and competence. His evaluation of Grey Elk was professional, but not hostile. "Go about your business," Holt told Grey Elk, his tone carrying quiet authority. "But understand folks are on edge these days. There's been talk of Indian raids, missing persons. Keep your head down and you'll have no trouble from me." Grey Elk nodded respectfully and proceeded to the general store where he traded rabbit pelts for cornmeal, salt pork, and medicinal salve. As he completed his transaction, careful to keep his manner humble and non-threatening, the store door opened to admit 2 familiar figures. Ruth Carter entered with the limping man Grey Elk recognized as the leader of her search party. In daylight, he could see the man more clearly scarred face military, bearing the careful way he favored his left leg that spoke of an old wound. A professional then, not just another hired gun. A fifth day without success. The man was saying, his voice carrying the frustration of someone accustomed to completing his assignments. That savage could be anywhere by now, assuming he survived his wounds. Unacceptable. Ruth replied sharply, her voice carrying the edge of barely controlled desperation. I want what was stolen from me, returned Crawford. Dead or alive, I don't care which. Crawford Grey Elk filed the name away. For future reference, shifted his weight uncomfortably. Mrs. Carter, hunting a man across open country is difficult work, especially when we don't know his destination or capabilities. If he's as skilled as he seems, he could evade us for weeks. Then bring more men, Ruth snapped. I'll pay whatever it takes. That savage has something that belongs to me, and I'll see him hang before I let him escape with it. Grey Elk kept his head down, gathering his purchases with careful slowness. He had nearly reached the door when Ruth's voice cut through the store like a blade. You there, Indian? Grey Elk turned slowly, meeting her gaze with carefully neutral expression. Up close, Ruth Carter looked every inch the respectable frontier widow, neatly dressed, properly groomed, wearing the sort of expression that suggested concern rather than cruelty. Only her eyes betrayed the cold calculation that lay beneath the performance. Have you seen any Indians traveling through this area? She asked, her voice carrying just the right note of worried authority. There's been a kidnapping, a white child taken by a savage. Very dangerous situation. Grey Elk felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but years of survival had taught him to control his expression. No child, he replied, simply letting his English sound more broken than it actually was. Travel alone. Hunt food only. Ruth studied him with calculating eyes, clearly trying to determine if he might be the man she sought. But Grey Elk had deliberately disguised his appearance, rubbing ash into his skin to darken it, changing his hair arrangement, adopting the stooped posture of a man older than his actual years. Where do you come from? Crawford interjected, his soldier's instincts apparently aroused by something in Grey Elk's manner. North, Grey Elk replied, gesturing vaguely. Follow game trails. No trouble for anyone. Ruth's expression flickered for a moment. Genuine uncertainty showed through her mask. She had expected to recognize her quarry immediately, but Grey Elk's deception was working. After a few more questions that he answered with careful ignorance, she dismissed him with a wave of her hand. Outside the store, Grey Elk found Sheriff Holt waiting by the hitching rail, apparently examining his horse's shoes, but clearly positioned to intercept anyone leaving the building. Interesting conversation in there, Holt said conversationally, not looking up from his task. Mrs. Carter seems very concerned about this missing child. Grey Elk weighed his options carefully. The sheriff seemed fair-minded, but even fair men were constrained by law and evidence. Without proof of Ruth's crimes, any accusation would sound like the desperate lie of a guilty man. Many children go missing, Grey Elk said carefully. Frontier is a dangerous place. Indeed it is, Holt replied finally, looking up to meet Grey Elk's eyes directly. Especially for those who can't defend themselves. His gaze was penetrating, as if he were trying to read something hidden beneath Grey Elk's surface. You know anything about defending children, friend? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither man could speak directly. Grey Elk sensed that Holt suspected more than he was saying, but proving suspicion and acting on it were very different things. A man protects innocent, Grey Elk replied simply. This is duty of all good people. Holt nodded slowly, as if Grey Elk had confirmed something he had already suspected. Wise words. And if a man found an innocent in danger, say a child being mistreated or held against her will, what would be his duty then? Save child. Grey Elk answered without hesitation. Whatever cost. Even if it meant breaking certain laws, even if it meant being hunted by those who preferred that child, remain hidden. The conversation had moved far beyond casual questioning. Holt was offering something, perhaps a chance to tell the truth, perhaps a trap designed to extract a confession. Grey Elk studied the sheriff's face, reading sincerity in his expression, but knowing that sincerity and safety were not the same thing. Sometimes law and justice are not same thing. Grey Elk said finally, "Good man chooses justice." Holt straightened, brushing dust from his hands with deliberate movements. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "I'm going to investigate certain inconsistencies in Mrs. Carter's story, things that don't quite add up about this kidnapping she's reported. You have 3 days to produce evidence that would help me understand what really happened. 3 days, and then I'll have to act on the information I've been given." Grey Elk understood. The sheriff was offering a narrow window of opportunity time to either escape the territory or prove their case against Ruth. But proving their case would require returning to the place where the greatest danger waited, the Carter homestead, where Anna's suffering had begun, and where the evidence of Ruth's crimes lay hidden. 3 days, Grey Elk agreed. When he returned to Anna, she was exactly where he had left her, alert and watchful, despite hours of solitary waiting. She accepted the food, gratefully eating with careful control. Rather than the desperation he had expected, another sign that her spirit was recovering along with her body. "We go back," he told her, studying her reaction carefully. "Need proof of woman's crimes to convince sheriff." Anna's eyes widened with fear, but she nodded with a determination he had come to recognize as her strongest quality. Using her fingertip in the dirt, she traced letters with careful precision: PROOFINCELLAR. Grey Elk leaned closer, reading the crude letters. "What proof?" "FATHERSBOOKHIDDEN. Her father's journal, hidden somewhere in the chamber that had been her prison. It might contain evidence of Ruth's crimes, documentation of the abuse Anna had suffered, perhaps even proof of larger conspiracies. But retrieving it would mean returning to the heart of danger, facing Ruth and her hired guns on their own territory. Anna traced one more word in the dirt, her finger pressing deep into the earth. JUSTICE. For the first time since her rescue, determination, rather than fear, dominated her expression. She had been passive long enough, surviving through silence and endurance. Now she wanted to fight back, to ensure that Ruth faced consequences for her crimes. The broken child was becoming something stronger, a young woman with the courage to seek justice, despite the cost. Grey Elk looked at the word she had traced, understanding its weight. Justice was what he had sought when he refused to kill innocent settlers. Justice was what had driven him to rescue Anna despite the danger. Justice was what they would pursue together, whatever the risk. 3 days to gather evidence, to expose the truth, to ensure that Anna's years of suffering were not meaningless. 3 days to prove that courage and determination could triumph over cruelty and deception. The most dangerous part of their journey was about to begin. They returned to the Carter homestead under cover of pre-dawn darkness, moving with the careful precision of hunters approaching dangerous prey. Grey Elk had spent hours studying the property through his makeshift spyglass, a piece of curved glass salvaged from a broken bottle, memorizing guard patterns, noting changes in Ruth's defensive preparations. The woman had not been idle during their absence. Additional men had arrived, bringing the total force to 6 armed searchers. But more significantly, she had begun making preparations that spoke of desperation rather than confidence. Supplies were being moved from the house to a storage shed, papers were being burned in the yard, and the atmosphere around the homestead carried the tension of people preparing for siege. Ruth was planning something, perhaps flight, perhaps a final violent solution to her problems. Either way, time was running short. From their concealed position in the rocks above the property, Grey Elk observed the guard rotations with professional interest. Most of Ruth's hired men were competent, but not exceptional, the sort of drifters who could follow orders and shoot straight, but lacked the imagination to adapt when circumstances changed unexpectedly. The exception was the young sandy-haired man Grey Elk had noticed during his first encounter with the search party. Unlike his companions who treated their assignment as routine work, this man seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his role. During his watch, he often stared toward the sealed chamber entrance, with an expression that suggested internal conflict. On the second night of observation, Grey Elk's patience was rewarded. Ruth departed for town, leaving only 3 men to guard the property. Better still, she took Crawford with her, leaving the nervous young man in charge of the remaining guards. Grey Elk waited until the other 2 had settled into their nighttime positions, one in the house, one patrolling the outer perimeter before making his move. The young guard had established himself near the old well, close enough to the chamber entrance to intervene if anyone approached it. But instead of preventing approach, the young man did something unexpected. He knelt beside the ventilation pipe, pressing his ear to the opening with the careful attention of someone straining to hear a distant sound. After a moment, he spoke into the pipe, his voice so soft that Grey Elk had to strain to hear the words. "Hello, is anyone down there? My name's Silas James. I worked for your pa before the accident." Anna's reaction was visible, even from Grey Elk's distant position. Her body went rigid, then she gripped his arm with sudden intensity. Using finger letters in the darkness, she spelled out Knewbefore. This changed everything. If James remembered Anna from her father's time, if he suspected what Ruth had done, he might be turned from enemy to ally. But approaching him remained dangerous. His conversion could be genuine doubt or an elaborate trap. Grey Elk made his decision with the swift calculation that had kept him alive through 3 years of exile. They would reveal themselves, but carefully ready to flee at the first sign of betrayal. They waited until the other guards had completed their patrol cycles, then approached the well with weapons ready, but not threatening. James heard them coming, his head snapped up, rifle swinging toward the sound, but he didn't fire immediately. "No, we're here," Grey Elk called softly, stepping into the moonlight with his hands visible. "You knew the child's father?" James stared at them for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been relief. When Anna stepped forward beside Grey Elk, the rifle fell from his suddenly nerveless fingers. "Anna-Louise," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "Dear God in heaven, is it really you?" The girl moved forward hesitantly, studying his face in the dim light. At the sound of her name, her real name spoken with recognition and warmth, her lips parted as though attempting speech for the first time in years. "I thought I was losing my mind." James continued, dropping to his knees, as if the sight of her had stolen his strength. Hearing sounds from that pipe, voices in the darkness. Ruth said it was wind or rats, but I knew it sounded like. His voice trailed off as the full horror of the situation became clear to him. Anna nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, her mouth still working silently as she struggled to find her voice after years of forced silence. James turned to Grey Elk with newfound understanding, his expression transforming from suspicion to gratitude. "You didn't kidnap her. You saved her. You pulled her out of that grave Ruth dug for her." "Yes," Grey Elk confirmed simply. "Child suffered too much. Had to help." James stood with visible resolve, his decision crystallizing in the space between one breath and the next. "Then I'll help you get the proof you need. Ruth Carter has to answer for what she's done." He gestured toward the chamber entrance. "There's something down there, isn't there? Something she doesn't want anyone to find." Anna nodded eagerly, then knelt and traced letters in the dirt, FATHERSJOURNAL. "Thomas kept records," James said, understanding immediately. always writing in that leather book of his, documenting everything. If he suspected what Ruth was planning, his expression darkened as the implications became clear. The plan they devised was necessarily simple. James would create a diversion while Grey Elk and Anna searched the chamber for Thomas Carter's hidden journal. But they had to move quickly. Sheriff Holt would arrive at dawn to investigate Ruth's claims, and their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Dawn was breaking as they approached the chamber entrance, James leading them past the other guards with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Checking the perimeter, he explained to the sleepy guard at the house, who waved them through without interest. The stones came away more easily than expected. Ruth's haste in sealing the entrance had left gaps that weakened the overall structure. James kept watch while Grey Elk descended first, then helped Anna navigate the steps that led back into her former hell. The chamber was exactly as she had left it, but seeing it again through Grey Elk's eyes brought home the full horror of what she had endured. The space was barely large enough for a child to lie down the walls, weeping with moisture, the stench of human misery so concentrated it was almost tangible. But Anna moved without hesitation to a specific corner where careful examination revealed loose mortar around one particular stone. Her fingers worked at the edges until it fell away, revealing a small cavity. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth against the moisture, was a leather-bound journal. As they emerged from the chamber, James's face appeared at the opening tense with alarm. "Someone's coming," he hissed. "Ruth's back early." They had barely cleared the entrance when Ruth's voice rang across the yard, sharp with suspicious fury. "What are you doing there, James?" She stood beside a loaded wagon, Crawford, and another man flanking her like bodyguards. Even from 30 yards away, her rage was palpable. She had returned to find her deepest secret, exposed her carefully guarded truth in the hands of her enemies. James stepped forward, positioning himself between Ruth and the others. "Mrs. Carter, I can explain. I'm sure you can—" Ruth interrupted, her voice carrying deadly calm. "Just like you can explain why you've been talking to my enemies, why you've been helping them steal from me." She gestured, and Crawford raised his rifle with practiced efficiency. The trap was sprung. Ruth had never trusted James completely, and his betrayal confirmed her worst suspicions about divided loyalties. But Anna, emboldened by possession of her father's journal and the presence of allies who believed her story, did something unexpected. She stepped out from behind James, facing Ruth directly for the first time in 3 years. "Not stealing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the morning air. "Taking back what was stolen from me." Ruth's face went white with shock. For 3 years, she had worked to convince Anna that she was dead, forgotten, erased from the world above. To hear the girl speak, to see her standing in sunlight with proof of Ruth's crimes in her hands, was a reversal so complete it seemed to rob Ruth of speech. But the moment of shock passed, quickly replaced by the cold fury of someone whose elaborate deceptions had been stripped away. "You should have stayed buried, you little ghost," Ruth snarled. "Should have died quietly like you were supposed to." She grabbed Crawford's rifle, swinging it toward Anna with murderous intent. "If you want something done right, do it yourself." Grey Elk moved to intercept, but James was already in motion, tackling Crawford and sending all 3 of them sprawling. The rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as they fought for control of the weapon. Anna clutched her father's journal to her chest, finally understanding the full scope of Ruth's evil and her own importance as the only witness who could expose it. The broken child was gone, replaced by a young woman determined to see justice done, regardless of the cost. The final confrontation had begun. What followed was chaos, but chaos with purpose, driven by years of suppressed truth finally breaking free. James and Crawford rolled across the yard, fighting for control of the rifle, while Ruth screamed orders at her remaining men. But these hired guns, faced with a situation far more complex than simple manhunting, hesitated just long enough for Grey Elk to act. He swept Anna toward the limited cover of an overturned wagon, the journal clutched in her arms like a sacred relic. Behind them, Ruth's voice rose to a shriek, "Kill them! Kill them all!" No witnesses, but James had chosen his moment well. His intimate knowledge of the property's layout, combined with the confusion of Ruth's hasty return, created opportunities that Grey Elk was quick to exploit. As Crawford's men emerged from their positions, they found themselves firing at shadows, while their targets moved between buildings with the fluid precision of people fighting for their lives. "The sheriff," Anna gasped, pointing toward a dust cloud on the distant road. "Sheriff Holt is coming." Ruth saw it too, and the sight seemed to drive her to desperate measures. She began shouting instructions about fire, about destroying evidence, about making sure nothing remained that could contradict her version of events. One of her men produced a can of kerosene, splashing the volatile liquid across the house's wooden walls. Another began piling papers and documents in the yard, preparing to burn anything that might incriminate their employer. "They're going to destroy everything." James called out, wresting the rifle away from Crawford and using it to drive Ruth's men back toward the buildings. "If we don't stop them now..." His warning was cut short by the sharp crack of a pistol. James stumbled, blood spreading across his shoulder, as Ruth lowered a small derringer with hands that shook from rage rather than fear. "Should have minded your own business, boy," she spat. "Should have taken your pay and kept your mouth shut like the others." But Grey Elk was already moving, using James's sacrifice to close the distance between himself and Ruth. She tried to bring the derringer around to face this new threat, but Grey Elk's hand closed over hers, forcing the weapon away from its target. They struggled for control of the gun, years of careful civilization stripped away to reveal the raw desperation underneath. Ruth fought with the fury of someone who had worked too hard to let everything slip away, while Grey Elk battled with the quiet determination of a man protecting innocent life. The derringer discharged between them, the bullet going wide, but the struggle continued. Ruth was stronger than her appearance suggested, sustained by the adrenaline of cornered prey. But Grey Elk's warrior training gave him advantages she could not match. As they fought, Anna made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of cowering behind cover, she emerged with her father's journal held high, her voice carrying across the yard with newfound strength. "Stop," she called out. "Everyone stop and listen." The unexpected command, coming from someone they had all considered a helpless victim, was startling enough to pause the violence. Anna stood in the center of the yard, no longer the terrified child Grey Elk had pulled from underground darkness, but a young woman armed with truth and the courage to speak it. "My name is Anna-Louise Carter," she announced, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am the daughter of Thomas Carter, and I have been kept prisoner for 3 years by the woman who murdered my father." Ruth's struggle against Grey Elk intensified, but he held her fast while Anna continued her testimony. The approaching dust cloud of Sheriff Holt's arrival was now visible, as individual riders adding urgency to her words. "This journal contains proof of Ruth Carter's crimes," Anna declared, holding up the leather-bound book. "Proof that she poisoned my father, that she arranged the mine explosion that killed 12 men, that she has stolen everything that belonged to me by right." Crawford, nursing a wounded arm from his fight with James, made a desperate lunge for the journal, but Anna was ready for him. She tossed the precious evidence to Grey Elk, who caught it one-handed while maintaining his grip on Ruth. "You can't prove anything." Ruth screamed, her composure finally shattered completely. "That girl is nobody. She's dead. She died 3 years ago, and everyone knows it." But Sheriff Holt was already dismounting at the edge of the yard, his experienced lawman's eye taking in the scene with quick comprehension. The smoking kerosene, the scattered papers, the blood on the ground, all of it painted a picture of desperate people caught in the act of destroying evidence. "What's going on here?" Holt demanded, his hand resting on his pistol but not yet drawing it. Anna stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Her father's journal extended toward the sheriff, like an offering. "I'm Anna-Louise Carter, Sheriff Holt. I believe you knew my father. This journal contains proof of the crimes committed against me and others. I request your protection while you examine the evidence." Holt's eyes widened with recognition and shock. He had known Anna as a child, had attended her supposed funeral, had accepted Ruth's story of fever and death without question. To see her alive, clearly having suffered terrible abuse, was a revelation that struck him with the force of physical blow. "Dear God," he whispered, accepting the journal with hands that trembled slightly. "Anna-Louise Carter, child, what has been done to you?" Ruth's last desperate gambit came as Holt began reading the journal's damning entries. She broke free from Grey Elk's loosened grip, not to flee, but to snatch up the rifle James had dropped during their struggle. "If I'm going down," she screamed, swinging the weapon toward Anna, "she's coming with me." But Grey Elk had been watching for exactly such a move. He threw himself between Ruth and Anna just as the rifle discharged, taking the bullet in his chest, but completing his charge. They went down together, the rifle clattering away across the hard-packed earth. Anna's scream cut through the morning air as Grey Elk rolled away from Ruth's still form, clutching his chest, where blood was already spreading across his buckskin shirt. But he was alive, conscious, and Ruth Carter's reign of terror was finally ended. Sheriff Holt stood over Ruth's body, his smoking pistol in his hand, his face grim with the knowledge of justice served. "Should have surrendered when you had the chance," he said quietly. "Should have faced trial instead of trying to murder a child in front of a lawman." As Dr. Wallace worked to stop Grey Elk's bleeding, Anna knelt beside him, her hands pressing against his wound with desperate efficiency. "Don't leave me," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're all I have left." "Not leaving," Grey Elk managed through gritted teeth. "Never leaving." Around them, Crawford and Ruth's remaining men were surrendering to Holt's deputies, the fight gone out of them with their leader's death. James, wounded but mobile, was already giving his testimony about Ruth's crimes and the conspiracy that had cost so many lives. The journal lay open beside them, Thomas Carter's careful handwriting revealing the full scope of Ruth's evil to official eyes for the first time. The mine explosion, the systematic poisoning, the years of child abuse, all of it documented by a man who had suspected but had died before he could act on his knowledge. Anna looked at the journal, then at Grey Elk's pale face, then at the gathering crowd of lawmen and witnesses who would finally hear her story and believe it. The broken child who had been buried alive was gone forever, replaced by a young woman with the strength to face whatever came next. Justice had been served, but more importantly, healing could finally begin. The trial of Crawford Harker and Ruth's surviving conspirators became the most significant legal proceeding in Wyoming Territory's short history. Held in Cheyenne during the autumn of 1868, it drew spectators from across the region, all eager to witness justice for crimes that had shocked even the violence-hardened frontier. Grey Elk sat in the packed courtroom, his chest still tender from the bullet wound that had nearly cost him his life. Beside him, Anna-Louise Carter bore little resemblance to the terrified child he had pulled from her underground prison 4 months earlier. Under the care of Sheriff Holt's sister, Martha Webster, Anna had regained much of her physical health, though shadows still haunted her eyes when she thought no one was watching. The prosecution, led by District Attorney William Bartlett, had built their case methodically around Thomas Carter's journal and Anna's testimony. The journal revealed not only Ruth's systematic abuse of Anna, but also evidence of a conspiracy that reached far beyond the Carter homestead. Members of the jury. Bartlett addressed the packed courtroom, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. The evidence will show that Ruth Carter Crawford and their associates orchestrated the murder of 12 innocent men in the mining explosion of May 1865. Thomas Carter's journal documents his growing suspicions about his wife's true nature, including her boast that The same method works twice when properly applied. Anna's testimony had been the most compelling evidence presented. Speaking in a voice that grew stronger with each day of recovery, she recounted the conversations she had overheard through her chamber's crude ventilation system during her 3 years of captivity. They celebrated. She told the hushed courtroom, her hands folded carefully in her lap, but her voice steady. 3 weeks after my father died, they came to the house drunk and laughing. Ruth said the explosion had worked perfectly, that 12 men were dead, and no one suspected a thing. Crawford bragged about weakening the support beams in exactly the section where my father always worked. The defense attorneys had tried to discredit Anna's testimony, arguing that a traumatized child's memories couldn't be trusted after such extensive abuse. But Dr. Wallace's medical testimony about Anna's physical condition, combined with the journal's corroborating evidence, painted an undeniable picture of systematic torture and premeditated murder. Grey Elk's own testimony had been crucial in establishing the timeline and circumstances of Anna's rescue. When Bartlett asked why he had risked his life for a white child, he had never met Grey Elk's answer resonated through the courtroom with simple moral clarity. Child is child. He said, his words carrying clearly to the furthest seats. Innocent is innocent. Color of skin does not matter when someone suffers. What Ruth did was evil beyond measure. Fighting evil is duty of all people who claim to be good. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Crawford received a sentence of 25 years in territorial prison, while 2 of Ruth's other surviving associates were sentenced to hang for their roles in the mining murders. But as Judge Morrison prepared to adjourn the proceedings, Crawford suddenly erupted from his defendant's chair, breaking free from the bailiff's restraint with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. "But you believe these lies," he shouted, his composure finally shattered by the weight of his sentence. "This territory belongs to God-fearing white men, not interfering savages and their sympathizers." In a movement so swift that many spectators missed it entirely, Crawford reached into his boot and withdrew a small knife that had somehow escaped detection during his daily searches. But instead of lunging toward Anna, as everyone expected, he fixed his hate-filled gaze on Grey Elk. "You cost me everything, Indian," he snarled, launching himself across the courtroom with murderous intent. "Everything I built, everything I worked for, gone because of you." Grey Elk tried to rise to meet the threat, as he always had, but his recent wound made him slow vulnerable. The months of healing had left him weaker than he realized, and pain shot through his chest as he struggled to stand. For the first time since Anna had known him, Grey Elk was not in a position to protect anyone, least of all himself. Crawford's blade flashed in the lamplight as he closed the distance with frightening speed, his target the man who had unraveled years of careful planning and brutal execution. In that moment, no one in the courtroom was prepared for what happened next. Anna moved with the fluid grace of someone breaking free from invisible chains. Without hesitation or fear, she snatched the heavy brass paperweight from the attorney's table beside her and swung it in a perfect arc that connected solidly with Crawford's temple just as he reached Grey Elk. The impact produced a sickening crack that silenced the entire courtroom. Crawford froze mid-stride, the knife slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers, his eyes wide with shock rather than triumph. Then he collapsed in a heap at Grey Elk's feet, consciousness fleeing before the determined strength of a child he had helped imprison and abuse. Anna stood over him, the brass weight still clutched in her hand, her face transformed by a cold fury that no one, not even Grey Elk, had seen before. In that moment, she was neither victim nor child, but an avenging force that had finally found expression. "That's for my father," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "And for everyone else who died because of your greed." Sheriff Holt moved quickly to secure Crawford, but his eyes never left Anna's face. He saw what everyone in the courtroom witnessed, the final transformation of a broken victim into someone who would never be victimized again. The girl who had been rescued from underground imprisonment had become her own protector, capable of defending not only herself, but those she loved. Grey Elk stared at Anna with a mixture of awe and pride. For months he had been her shield, her protector, her guardian against a world that had shown her only cruelty. Now, in the most unexpected moment, their roles had reversed. She had protected him when he was vulnerable, had struck without hesitation to save him from harm. "It's over," Anna said finally, setting down the makeshift weapon and meeting Grey Elk's gaze with perfect clarity. Truly over this time. As bailiffs dragged the unconscious Crawford away and the judge called for order, Grey Elk reached out to take Anna's hand, their fingers intertwined with the comfortable familiarity of people who had faced death together and emerged victorious. "You saved me," he said, simply, the words carrying a weight that both of them understood. Anna's smile transformed her face from pretty to radiant. "As you saved me," she replied. "That's what family does." The trial was over. The conspiracy that had cost 14 lives, 12 in the mine explosion, Thomas Carter by poison and Ruth by her own violent choices, had been exposed and punished. Anna was free not just from physical imprisonment, but from the role of perpetual victim that circumstances had tried to force upon her. And Grey Elk, the exiled warrior who had found purpose in protecting an innocent child, had discovered something equally valuable, that the greatest gift he could give her was not endless protection, but the courage and confidence to protect herself and others when the moment demanded it. As they left the courthouse together that afternoon, something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. They walked side by side, neither leading nor following, but moving forward together as equals united by mutual respect and shared purpose. Whatever came next, they would face it as they were meant to, not as protector and protected, but as partners in the truest sense of the word. Recovery took months, but this time it was different. Instead of the desperate flight and hidden camps that had characterized their early relationship, Grey Elk convalesced in the clean, well-appointed guest room of Martha Webster's house in town. Anna rarely left his bedside during the worst days, reading aloud from books. Martha provided, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. "The mine is producing better than anyone expected," she reported one autumn morning, consulting a letter from the foreman Silas James had recommended. "The silver vein runs deeper than Father ever suspected. We'll have enough money to do whatever we want." Anna's inheritance, the land, the mine, and the considerable wealth it was generating, had been legally secured under Sheriff Holt's supervision, with Grey Elk appointed as her guardian until she reached majority. But more importantly, she was becoming the intelligent, determined young woman her father had raised her to be. Martha Webster, a former schoolteacher who had never married, had taken to Anna with maternal enthusiasm. Under her influence, Anna was not only recovering her health, but developing aspirations that extended far beyond simple survival. "I want to build something," Anna announced one afternoon as Grey Elk practiced moving his healing arm. "Something that will help other children who find themselves alone and afraid." Grey Elk smiled, recognizing the fire in her eyes that reminded him so strongly of her father. "What kind of something?" "A school," she said, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who had given the matter serious thought. "But not just any school. A place where all children can learn together, Indian and white Mexican and others. Somewhere children are judged by their minds and hearts, not by the color of their skin or the circumstances of their birth." The idea was revolutionary for its time and place, but Grey Elk nodded approvingly. "Your father would be proud. Good use of silver money." Judge Holt, who had been promoted following his handling of the Carter case, visited regularly with updates on the broader implications of their story. The case had attracted attention throughout the territory and beyond, inspiring new laws, protecting orphan children, and requiring regular welfare inspections. Anna's suffering has been transformed into protection for others. he reported during one visit. The legislature passed the Carter Act, unanimously mandatory education records, medical examinations. When abuse is suspected, regular verification of orphan children's welfare. Your case saved more lives than you'll ever know. As winter turned to spring, Anna's plans for their future became more concrete and ambitious. She corresponded with educators, designed curricula, and carefully selected a site near Bitter Creek that would serve the growing community while remaining accessible to children from distant ranches. By summer, construction had begun on the Carter Elk School for Territorial Education. The name had been Anna's insistence. She wanted Grey Elk's contribution recognized alongside her own, their partnership acknowledged as the foundation of everything they hoped to accomplish. The building was ambitious by frontier standards. 2 stories, multiple classrooms, a library, and boarding facilities for students whose families lived too far away for daily attendance. Grey Elk worked closely with the builders, despite his limited mobility, ensuring the structure would be both beautiful and functional. His reputation in the community had undergone a complete transformation. The suspicious outsider had become a respected businessman and guardian, his devotion to Anna's welfare earning him grudging acceptance, even from those who still harbored racial prejudices. The mine's success, combined with the school project's noble purpose, had created a new identity that transcended the simple categories of Indian and white. "You've accomplished something unprecedented," Judge Holt observed during one visit to the construction site. An Indian with legal guardianship of a white child, a business partnership that crosses racial lines, a school designed to break down barriers between communities. It's exactly what this territory needs as it grows toward statehood. Anna's 15th birthday passed quietly, marked by a simple celebration with Martha Grey Elk and Silas James, who had recovered from his gunshot wound to become both mine foreman and trusted family friend. But the real milestone came later that autumn when Anna spoke publicly for the first time since her rescue. The occasion was the territorial governor's visit to examine the new school. Standing before a crowd of local officials, territorial legislators, and curious citizens, Anna addressed them with poise that would have been remarkable in someone twice her age. "This school exists because people chose to believe in justice over prejudice, truth over convenient lies," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. "My guardian, Grey Elk, risked everything to save a child he didn't know simply because it was the right thing to do. If a Cheyenne warrior and a white girl can find common ground in their commitment to protecting innocence, surely our children can learn to see beyond the differences that have divided their parents." The governor was sufficiently impressed to approve territorial funding for similar schools throughout Wyoming. Anna's vision was spreading beyond their small community, transforming from a local experiment into a territorial movement toward true integration and equality. As their second winter together approached, Grey Elk reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 2 years earlier, he had been a man without a people, wandering the territory in bitter exile. Now he was a respected businessman, a loving guardian, and a bridge between communities that had been at war since the first white settlers crossed the Mississippi. Anna had traveled an even more remarkable path, from terrified, imprisoned child to articulate advocate for justice and educational reform. The strength she had shown in surviving her captivity had blossomed into leadership that inspired adults twice her age. One evening in late November, as the first snow began to fall across the Wyoming landscape, Anna found Grey Elk reviewing the mine's accounts in Martha's warm parlor. She sat beside him on the horsehair sofa, holding a letter that had arrived that morning from the territorial capital. "News from Cheyenne." She set her eyes bright with excitement. "They want us to testify before the territorial legislature about expanding the integrated education program statewide." She paused, studying his face with the careful attention she had learned to give to matters of importance. "Are you ready for that kind of attention? It will mean questions, scrutiny, people challenging our right to do what we're doing." Grey Elk considered the question seriously. Public testimony would mean exposure questions about his background and qualifications, potential challenges to his unusual position in territorial society. There would be those who saw his guardianship of Anna as unnatural, who questioned whether an Indian could properly raise a white child. But he thought of Anna's words at the school dedication, her vision of a world where children could learn and grow without the artificial barriers that had defined his own life. He thought of the students who would attend their school, the bridges that would be built, the healing that would take place. If it helps other children, he said finally, then yes. We speak for those who have no voice. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Anna smiled, the expression lighting up her face like sunrise over the mountains. I knew you'd say that. She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the affection they had built through shared trials and mutual respect. We make a good team, don't we? Yes. Grey Elk agreed, feeling the familiar warmth of contentment spread through his chest. Very good team. Outside, snow continued to fall across the Wyoming territory, blanketing the land in pristine white. The mine operated steadily, providing wealth that funded their expanding educational mission. The school neared completion, ready to welcome its first students in the spring. Most importantly, the unlikely family they had created, a Cheyenne warrior, a white girl, and the kind woman who had opened her home to them both, had found peace and purpose in their shared commitment to justice and healing. The child who had been pulled from underground imprisonment had become a voice for the voiceless. The warrior who had refused to kill innocents had discovered that his greatest battles would be fought not with weapons, but with wisdom, compassion, and unwavering moral courage. Together, they had built something that would outlive them both, a legacy of healing that transformed suffering into service trauma, into strength and division, into unity. The future stretched before them, bright with promise and unlimited possibility. But their greatest test still lay ahead, waiting in the shadows of their success, like a wolf following the scent of blood. Spring 1875, 7 years later. The shot echoed across the Wyoming foothills like thunder, sending birds exploding from the cottonwoods that lined Willow Creek. Grey Elk threw himself sideways as the bullet meant for his chest instead tore through the muscle of his right thigh, sending him tumbling behind an overturned freight wagon. "Stay down," he shouted to Anna, who crouched behind the wagon's bulk with her rifle ready, her blue eyes bright with determination rather than fear. At 22, she bore little resemblance to the terrified child he had rescued 7 years earlier. Her face had filled out, her body had grown strong, and her spirit burned with the quiet fire of someone who had faced the worst humanity could offer and emerged unbroken. The man who had ambushed them on the road back from the territorial capital moved through the rocks with the practiced precision of a professional killer. Bearded and scarred, wearing trail clothes that had seen hard use, he worked the lever of his rifle with movements born of long experience. Should have stayed buried with the rest of them. He called out his voice, carrying the flat accent of someone raised far from Wyoming's mountains. Ruth Carter paid good money to make sure this day would come, and I always finish what I'm paid to do. Grey Elk's mind raced as he assessed their situation. The ambush had been perfectly timed as they were returning from Anna's graduation ceremony at the territorial capital, where she had delivered a speech that had impressed legislators and earned promises of additional funding for their integrated schools. The road through the foothills was isolated, with no chance of rescue or assistance. Their wagon team had bolted when the shooting started, taking their supplies and Grey Elk's hunting rifle with them. He had only his knife and the Colt revolver he had learned to use during his years as Anna's guardian weapons, that were effective at close range but useless against a man with a rifle who kept his distance. "Who are you?" Grey Elk called out, buying time while he calculated angles and distances. "He name's Dutch Kohler," the man replied, continuing his methodical advance from cover to cover. "Ruth Carter hired me 5 years back just before she died in that courthouse. Left money with specific instructions if that Indian and the girl ever got too important, too visible, too much trouble for certain interested parties, I was to finish what she started." Anna's sharp intake of breath was audible even over the sound of Kohler's boots on loose stone. Grey Elk understood her shock. Ruth's hatred had reached across years and beyond death itself, her venom poisoning the present with the malice of the past. Same method works twice. Kohler continued unconsciously echoing Ruth's favorite phrase from Thomas Carter's journal. Just like she arranged that mine accident, just like she tried to finish you in that courtroom. She always believed in having backup plans, redundant solutions to persistent problems. The words confirmed what Grey Elk had long suspected. Ruth's conspiracy had been larger and more complex than even the trial had revealed. There were others involved, people with enough money and influence to hire professional killers to wait years for the perfect opportunity to strike. Ruth Carter is dead. Anna called out, her voice carrying clearly across the broken ground. Her crimes were exposed, justice was served. Why continue her work? Kohler's laugh was harsh as breaking glass. Justice. You call it justice when a bunch of territorial politicians decide they know better than the people who built this country, when they start letting Indians teach white children, mixing the races like it's some kind of blessed sacrament. His rifle cracked again, and the bullet splintering wood inches from Anna's head. She ducked back behind the wagon, but her expression remained determined rather than frightened. 7 years of building their school of fighting for integration and equality had taught her that some battles were worth any cost. Your little experiment is causing problems for people with serious money invested in keeping things the way they've always been. Kohler continued, his voice carrying the practiced sneer of a man who had embraced hatred as a philosophy. Mining companies, cattle barons, territorial politicians who understand that keeping the races separate keeps power where it belongs, in the hands of those born to wield it. Ruth Carter was just one player in a much larger game. Grey Elk felt pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. Their success had made enemies beyond Wyoming's borders, powerful people who saw their integrated schools as threats to the established order. Ruth's personal vendetta had become part of something much larger and more dangerous, a last-ditch effort by the old guard to halt the progress of a changing world. The world you're trying to protect is already dying. Anna called out, her voice steady and strong. It's dying because it's built on fear and hate instead of justice and compassion. The world you're fighting against is the future, Kohler. And you can't kill the future no matter how many bullets you have. Kohler's response was another rifle shot, closer this time, as he steadily closed the distance. Pretty words from a pretty girl, he mocked. But words don't stop bullets, and ideals don't stop men like me who know how the world really works. The natural order will be restored one way or another. But knowing the scope of the conspiracy didn't change their immediate situation. Kohler was methodically closing the distance, using the terrain's natural cover to protect himself while maintaining clear lines of fire. Soon, he would be close enough that their makeshift shelter would become a trap rather than protection. Anna, Grey Elk said quietly, checking the cylinder of his revolver. When I move, you run for those rocks behind us. Don't look back, don't hesitate. Find cover and keep moving until you reach town. No, she replied firmly, checking her own rifle with the competence he had taught her years earlier. We face this together. We've never run from a fight that mattered, and I won't start now. This is our school, our vision, our future. I won't let him take it from us. Grey Elk started to argue, but another rifle shot cut through his words. This one came from a different direction behind Kohler's position, and the assassin's yelp of surprise suggested he had been hit. Anna, Grey Elk, are you all right? Silas James's voice carried across the hillside, and Grey Elk could see the mine foreman working his way through the rocks with a rifle in his hands and determination written across his weathered face. Kohler spun toward this new threat, but the distraction gave Grey Elk the opening he needed. He burst from cover, ignoring the pain in his wounded leg, closing the distance to Kohler with the desperate speed of a man fighting for more than just his own life. The assassin tried to bring his rifle around, but Grey Elk was already inside his effective range. They collided hard, both men going down among the sharp stones, fighting for control of weapons that could decide everything. Cellar was younger and stronger, but Grey Elk had been fighting for survival since before the other man learned to shave. He drove his knee into Cellar's ribs, hearing the satisfying crack of breaking bone, then followed up with an elbow strike that opened a gash across the assassin's forehead. But Cellar recovered quickly, using his size advantage to roll Grey Elk beneath him and drive a fist toward his throat. Grey Elk caught the blow on his forearm and the impact sending jolts of pain through his wounded shoulder, and then managed to get his legs beneath Cellar's body and launch him backwards. They rolled apart, both reaching for weapons, but Anna was already moving. Her rifle spoke with authority, the bullet taking Cellar in the shoulder and spinning him away from his fallen weapon. "That's for 7 years of looking over our shoulders," she said, working the lever action to chamber another round. "And this is for everyone you and your kind would condemn to ignorance and hatred, because you're too afraid to imagine a world built on equality rather than dominance. The world you're defending died with Ruth Carter. This is the future." But Cellar still had fight left in him. He pulled a knife from his boot, lunging toward Grey Elk with the desperate ferocity of a wounded animal. The blade caught the sunlight as it descended, aimed at Grey Elk's heart with killing precision. Anna's second shot took Cellar in the chest, the impact lifting him off his feet and sending him crashing into a pile of loose rock. He twitched once, then lay still, his eyes staring sightlessly at the Wyoming sky. Another casualty in the endless battle between those who fought to preserve an unjust past and those who worked to build a better future. Silence settled over the hillside like a blanket broken only by the sound of their labored breathing and the distant call of a hawk riding the mountain thermals. Grey Elk struggled to his feet, testing his wounded leg and finding it painful but functional. Anna lowered her rifle, her face pale but resolute. "Is it over?" she asked quietly. "Are there others?" Silas James approached cautiously, keeping his own weapon ready, until he was certain Cellar posed no further threat. "There might be," he admitted, "but word will spread about what happened here. Professional killers don't like working for employers who can't protect them. With Cellar dead and their scheme exposed, the others will probably find easier targets." Grey Elk nodded, understanding the logic. They had survived Ruth Carter's final gambit, broken the chain of vengeance that had stretched across 7 years. But more importantly, they had proven that their vision of justice and equality was worth defending with their lives. "Come on," Anna said, offering Grey Elk her shoulder for support. "Let's go home. We have a school to run and students to teach. The future is waiting for us." As they made their way down from the hills, Grey Elk reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter at an abandoned homestead to a partnership that had changed the course of territorial history, they had built something larger than either of them could have achieved alone. Ruth Carter's hatred had finally been laid to rest, buried with the hired killer who represented her last attempt to reach across death and destroy what she could not control in life. The child who had been imprisoned in darkness had become a beacon of hope for others. The warrior who had been exiled for his principles had found a cause worthy of his sacrifice. Their greatest battle was over. The work of healing and building could continue. Summer 1875. The courthouse renovation had been underway for weeks when the workers made their discovery. Behind a false wall in Judge Morrison's old chambers, they found a metal strongbox that had been sealed for years. When Sheriff Holt opened it in the presence of Anna and Grey Elk, they discovered documents that would provide the final piece to their long and complicated story. The letter was in Thomas Carter's careful handwriting, dated just days before his death. "To whom it may concern, but most especially to my beloved daughter, Anna-Louise. If you are reading this, then my worst fears about Ruth have proven justified, and I have likely died by her hand rather than from the mine accident she will undoubtedly arrange. I have grown increasingly certain that my wife means to harm both Anna and myself in pursuit of the silver deposits I discovered on our land. Should anything happen to me, I have made arrangements for Anna's care that Ruth knows nothing about. Through my correspondence with various territorial officials, I have identified a man of exceptional character, who currently lives in exile from his own people due to his refusal to participate in the killing of innocent settlers. His name is Grey Elk of the northern Cheyenne, and I have taken the liberty of establishing a trust that names him as Anna's guardian, should I die before she reaches majority. This arrangement may seem unconventional, even shocking to those who judge by race rather than character. But I have made extensive inquiries about this man, and everything I have learned convinces me that he possesses the moral courage and protective instincts that Anna will need if she is to survive Ruth's machinations. I do not know if Grey Elk will accept this responsibility, or even if he will be in a position to fulfill it. But I have included in this trust sufficient resources to compensate him for his efforts, along with detailed instructions for accessing Anna's inheritance when she comes of age. If Anna is reading this herself, then she has survived whatever horrors Ruth inflicted upon her, and she has found the protector I prayed she would find. Know that every choice I made was motivated by love for you, my precious daughter, and by the hope that you would grow up to be the strong, compassionate woman I always knew you could become. The silver mine will provide more wealth than our family could spend in several lifetimes. Use it wisely, use it to heal the wounds that divide our territory. And remember that your father's love reaches across time and death to embrace you still. Your devoted father, Thomas Carter. Post-scriptum Grey Elk, if you are reading this, then you have already proven yourself worthy of my trust. Thank you for saving my daughter when I could not. The enclosed bank draft represents only a fraction of what your service is worth, but I hope it will provide some compensation for the sacrifices you have made on Anna's behalf. Anna's tears fell freely as she finished reading her father's final message, but they were tears of completion rather than grief. The circle had been closed and the mystery resolved. Her father had not died helplessly trusting to chance for her survival. He had planned for her protection with the same methodical care he had brought to everything else in his life. Grey Elk stared at the bank draft, enclosed with the letter, a sum large enough to buy a small ranch or fund a comfortable retirement. Thomas Carter had somehow arranged for his daughter's rescue years before it was needed, trusting in the character of a man he had never met, but whose reputation for moral courage had reached him despite the barriers of race and circumstance. He knew, Anna said softly, looking up at Grey Elk with wonder in her eyes. Somehow, my father knew that you would find me, that you would save me. It wasn't chance that brought you to our homestead. It was his love reaching across time to make sure I survived. Sheriff Holt nodded slowly, examining the legal documents that accompanied the letter. Everything's in order, he confirmed. The trust was properly established, witnessed by territorial officials, filed with the appropriate authorities. Your guardianship of Anna wasn't just moral necessity, it was your legal right and responsibility from the moment Thomas Carter died. The revelation transformed their understanding of everything that had come before. Grey Elk's exile, his wandering across the territory, his presence at the Carter homestead on that fateful day. All of it had been guided by Thomas Carter's love and foresight. They had been connected by bonds of destiny rather than mere chance. Martha Webster, now in her 60s, but still sharp as a blade, wiped her eyes with a handkerchief as she examined the documents. This explains so much, she said. Thomas Carter was known for his careful planning, his attention to detail. He would never have left Anna's fate to chance if he suspected Ruth's true nature. Outside the courthouse, the first students were arriving for the fall semester at the Carter Elk School for Territorial Education. The building had grown since its founding, expanded to accommodate demand from families across the territory who wanted their children educated in an environment that emphasized character over racial division. Anna watched through the window as children of various backgrounds played together in the schoolyard, Indian and white Mexican, and others united by their youth and their shared opportunity for education. The vision she and Grey Elk had built together was thriving, creating the kind of future her father had dreamed of when he planned for her protection. "We should frame this letter," she said, holding her father's final message with reverent care. "It belongs in the school where future generations can see what love and planning can accomplish across the barriers that seem to separate us." Grey Elk nodded, understanding that the letter represented more than historical document. It was proof that love could transcend death, that careful planning could triumph over evil, that the bonds between people of goodwill were stronger than the artificial divisions of race and culture. "Your father was wise man," he said simply. "He knew that protecting innocent children is most important work in world. He chose well when he trusted us with that responsibility." As they left the courthouse together, walking toward the school where their students waited, Anna slipped her arm through Grey Elk's with the comfortable affection of someone who had never doubted their connection, but now understood its deeper significance. "We have proven that his faith was not misplaced," she said. "We have shown that love is stronger than hatred, that trust can triumph over fear, that two people from different worlds can create something neither could achieve alone." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the schoolyard as they approached the building that had become the symbol of their shared vision. Students looked up from their games to wave at their teachers, their faces bright with the innocent hope that Anna had once thought lost forever. Behind them, the mountains rose toward a sky that promised fair weather for the harvest season. The territory was growing, changing, becoming something better than what it had been. And at the center of that transformation stood a school built on the foundation of one man's love for his daughter and another man's willingness to honor that trust despite the cost. The future stretched before them, unlimited and bright with promise. The child who had been buried alive had become a beacon of hope. The warrior who had been exiled for his principles had found his true home. And together, they continued building a legacy that would endure long after their own stories had become legend. The circle was complete. The healing could continue. And somewhere in the turning of the seasons and the laughter of children, Thomas Carter's love continued to work its quiet magic on a world that desperately needed the lessons only the innocent could teach.